You're listening to Three Kitchens podcast, hosted by Aaron Walker and Heather Dyer.
We're home cooks, sharing our kitchen adventures with you. Let's all get inspired, cook better, and eat great food. Happy summer!
Happy summer.
Welcome to Three Kitchens.
It is July.
Yeah.
And it seems like a fun time of the year to talk about food trends and just have a really good little conversation about what tends to be popular and then sometimes fades away into obscurity. That's essentially my definition of a trend.
Yeah.
So we thought we need a guest to come on and bring their knowledge and expertise and perspective and opinions, just like we have about food trends. And where better to go than Savour Calgary Food Magazine?
They're a local publication here in Calgary, Alberta, and they talk all things food. So joining us today is Wanda Baker, the Marketing and Communications Manager and Digital Manager at Savour Calgary Magazine. And she's got a whole bunch of great insights and ideas and thoughts all around food trends.
And how they come about and where they go when they disappear. But listen, I want to just tell you something first, okay? So we have occasionally noted, and this is kind of where this idea for this episode came from, is that sometimes we get on a path or we're interested in something and we start looking into it and we're planning an episode about it and we're talking about it. And then all of a sudden we're seeing it pop up in our social feeds, on Pinterest. You hear it on the radio. You start seeing it everywhere you go. It's like, well, how did everybody else know? Yeah.
Did we create this or did we send out like a secret message to everybody?
Well, guess what? There's a name for this. I heard, which is just so strange the way the universe works, but I was listening to another podcast, totally not food related. It was a true crime podcast, and they mentioned this concept, which is frequency illusion. And I was like, when she said it, I was like, that's the thing. So I looked it up, and here's what it is. Frequency illusion is also called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. It's a cognitive bias in which someone learns a new word or a new concept, or you're interested in something, you start thinking about it, and suddenly, in air quotes, you start to see it everywhere. And it's like, the fact is, it's just more common because it's on your mind.
Okay, so I'm only noticing it because I'm thinking about it, but it's always been passing by.
That's right. Just like I got a new car last year, suddenly every freaking person on the road drives my exact car. We were planning an episode a couple months back on jellied salads. We start seeing jellied salad on every food channel you can find. So it's called frequency illusion. It's not us controlling the universe, but it is really weird.
And here I thought I had so much power.
You have different power.
Okay.
All right, let's talk some food trends. Thank you, Wanda, for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we hope everyone enjoys this fun chat about trending food.
Today we have a special guest with us. It's Wanda Baker from Savour Calgary Magazine.
Hello. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Can you tell our listeners what is Savour Calgary Magazine?
So Savour Calgary Food Magazine is a local magazine in Calgary that shares all kinds of great information about food. We share recipes, we share restaurants, or new restaurants or established restaurants, cooking tips, new chef news, restaurant news, all the goings on in Calgary, actually, and area. So sometimes Banff and Canmore and Okotoks and Airdrie, and just kind of try to get all the good eats and the good news out there for everybody to know about.
Nice.
Fantastic.
So Savour Calgary Food Magazine started about 4 years ago, and the women that started the magazine were already involved in a previous magazine that had unfortunately closed.
Okay.
So they decided that they wanted to keep the momentum going, and they started a fresh and new publication to continue the momentum in Calgary.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So we wanted to discuss trends in food? Because as anyone like us who's in this space, whether it's professionally or out of an interest or a hobby, you cannot really be looking at food and recipes and going out to restaurants without noticing that it is a trendy space to be. What do you know about food trends? Like, how do they come about?
Calgary has changed so much in the last 20 years. We used to be predominantly a meat and potatoes town, and we've had such an influx of culinary talent in our city, whether it's young chefs, chefs that have come in and kind of set the boundaries for food innovation and culinary innovation and have really grown the city to where it is now. And as far as food trends, I think they kind of come from everywhere. They come from these chefs that are, some of them are culinary visionaries. They want to try new ingredients, they want to try new techniques, and they're kind of pushing the boundaries. Food trends kind of also come from social media, of course. You can't get away from social media and food bloggers.
Mm-hmm.
Food trends come from globalization, and we have so many great cultures living in our city right now that they really add to the culinary landscape and help these trends develop.
Mm-hmm. We kind of recognize how much of an influence social media and the connectivity that we have today influences this. Can you speak at all about how these sort of food trends happened prior to that globalization or that connectivity that we have now?
That's a really interesting question. So I grew up when there was no internet and there was no food TV. Well, so I grew up watching PBS on Saturday mornings, and I would watch Julia Child and Walk with Yan, and
Mm-hmm.
that was exciting for me. I think at that time when there was no exposure like there is now, those food trends probably started in restaurants, right?
Okay.
Like, again, back to the chefs who are the visionaries who have learned a new technique, or they've gone to do a collaboration in a restaurant and seen something that interests them, or they've traveled and tried something in a different
Mm-hmm.
country and they bring that back to their restaurant, and then they try it and they share it. And then the food critics and the food writers back then, and the chefs that write the cookbooks, all take that, they get inspired by this and they
Mm-hmm.
take that information and they share it. And so I think back in the day, that's probably how food trends were shared.
Mm.
And then along came the internet.
Yeah. And then as consumers, we
Yeah.
go out to eat and we're like, I mean, we still do that even with social media and the internet and all of this, but you go out and you're like, oh, I love this so much. I want to recreate this at
Mm-hmm.
home. So then you go home and you try to make it at home. And then, now you start seeing it in cookbooks or
Yeah.
in recipes that are printed in the newspaper or a magazine like Savour. So it's like these things even make their way into the home kitchen.
They really do. And I'm also a food blogger. And so I can speak from experience in that I find inspiration everywhere.
Mm.
I still love to watch TV cooking shows. I still have my collection of cookbooks and I'm always looking for the latest and greatest. And I'm fortunate enough to be in the community quite a bit as part of my job as a food writer and to see what's going on and see what the chefs are trying. And of course, there's always the TikTok trends and social media trends, which are more short lived, but inspiration comes from everywhere. And yes, absolutely would love to try a recipe that I had in a restaurant that's not too technical that I
Mm-hmm.
could actually do at home.
Yeah. Sometimes it's even just the flavors or something they do different that you're like, oh, I never thought of putting those two things together.
Exactly, exactly. There's so much inspiration that comes out of chefs' kitchens. It's remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
The hard part, I think, is like sometimes identifying
Mm.
the ingredients of like what was
Absolutely.
in that especially things that you can't see the individual
Mm-hmm.
ingredients. It's kind of fun to then try to dissect it based on your palate, which we don't all have fantastic
Yeah.
palates like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I tend to always take a picture of the menu because I will never
Mm.
remember what was in it. And if there is an
Ah.
ingredient that I can't detect, I will certainly ask the server just
Oh,
to give
okay.
me some more detail on it. And maybe that's cheating a little bit, but that just helps with the inspiration. And then I'll
Right.
think, oh, you know what? That was great with a strawberry, but what about with a cherry or a Saskatoon berry? Like, how can I change that up?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Trying to
Hmm.
pretend to be a chef, but
Hey, it's home cooking, right? You can spin it off because maybe strawberry's not your favorite flavor, but you like berries, right?
Exactly.
Knowing that you can
Exactly.
do those substitutions, that's
Yes,
important.
I agree.
Isn't one of Savour Magazine's focuses is to look at local, not just local restaurants, but local ingredients? And so I think, you try something in a restaurant. Maybe when you're traveling, you try something and you're like, oh, I really want to have that at home. And what have we got that's local to us that we could incorporate into this?
Savor definitely does focus on local restaurants and local ingredients and the term farm to table and local suppliers and producers. We really want our community in Calgary to support them. But I mean, if you go to a restaurant and have Korean barbecue, or you go somewhere and have a very unique ingredient that's hard to find, then you have to go maybe to an international grocery store and find that ingredient, which is actually another thing that is really great in Calgary is we have such a selection of international grocery stores. So if you
Hmm.
decide you put on a dinner party and you want it to be Thai food, you can go and probably find the majority of the ingredients there.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
You kind of touched on it a little bit there, but you were talking about how the TikTok trends move really fast. I'm thinking about how the way that these trends come about and the speed at which they move now, I'm with the way that we communicate, they come and they go really fast. Whereas in the past, I'm gonna think that it took more time to kind of go through the population and come back out again. And so we see those sort of older trends coming back into style again. Do you think these TikTok trends that kind of have their minute of glory, are they going to come and recycle back, or are they just like one and done?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't even know that I can answer that because you see some of them, and I'm one of those people that have tried them. I actually tried the corn ribs a couple of years ago and made them and
Oh.
found it to be a bit challenging as far as cutting those ribs off the corn, making sure you don't take your fingers with it, and will that ever come back and get recycled? Maybe it will, and then just have a spin put on it. Like I
Mhm.
think that's what we see with the classics. A lot of classics in restaurant or sorry, retro recipes are making a comeback, and they're getting a bit of a spin on them,
Mhm.
right? A bit of a twist put onto them. So I think it's like the fashion industry in that you'll have a trend, you'll have something that comes into the community and everyone really loves it, and then it'll settle down because the next thing is coming, and then maybe in 4 or 5 years maybe a well-known chef or somebody in the culinary community will bring it back and put their own spin on it. And so all of a sudden it's a reinvented retro dish again.
Right.
One of the examples, it's a pretty common example, I would think, is like jellied
Mm.
dishes. So jellied salads were big. I'll say like 20 years ago, thinking it's like 1950, because my brain just can't compute how long ago that actually was. But say in like the 60s, it was big to have these like jelly molds with salad in them, and it was really fancy, and you bring that out at the dinner party. And then there was a time where people were like, ew, that's terrible. Why were they eating that? That was such a horrible thing. And now they resurface again and they pop up. And I mean, we did an episode on them not long ago because we actually quite like them.
Yeah, we found some good ones to revisit.
And it reminds
Oh,
us of childhood. There's like a nostalgia there. We ate them when we were kids, and so it's funny how they resurface, and they're not always modernized. Sometimes they just come back and you make what you had as a kid, or.
Hmm.
that's fair. That's fair. And that's the same with a lot of people who grew up eating soup in a can. And then you take that soup in a can and you mix it into a casserole. And I still see those dishes popping up as well. Not in restaurants per se, but more
Yeah.
food bloggers and people that want to bring that dish, like you say, that you grew up with and that taste back and share it with their family. Jellied salads, that's an interesting one for sure.
Well, it's a divisive type of topic because you either quite like them or you think it's the most disgusting thing you've ever seen.
And there's certain
Some of them are
ingredients that
bad.
we've
Yeah.
just decided should never have ever entered Jello and should never ever enter any sort of jellied salad again. And we feel that
Yeah.
pretty strongly about the meats and the
Right.
fish and the some of the
Oh,
more savory stuff just doesn't quite sit right.
It's fun to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm glad you
Yeah.
clarified that because when you said that you both have kind of there's some that you like, all that I could think about was the meat, the
Oh,
sit
No,
down.
no, no.
So I'm
We
glad
have
you
to
clarified that.
fruit and some vegetables.
Right. Okay. Got
Yeah,
it.
we're keeping it pretty simple.
yeah.
But something like casseroles, when you mentioned casseroles, that was also a big one dish dinner.
Hmm.
It was at a time when convenience was really important to cooks at home. And now I think you see it updated. Maybe it doesn't have the canned soup or the convenience items in it, but it's a recreation of that casserole that you remember from being a kid, or it's something your mom made, but now you're adapting that recipe to suit your family.
Yeah, nostalgia definitely comes into play with recipes. Like, and when you think about certain meals like mac and cheese, well, that was really popular back then and it has never gone away. People put spins and
Mm.
twists on it, but you still have that, you can still make that classic, delicious, ooey gooey, cheesy mac and cheese.
Hmm.
So some dishes are just never going to go away.
Hmm.
Yeah. What do you think kind of moves trends into just becoming those staples?
I think it's comfort food.
Mm.
Like, I think, even when you look at cultural cuisine, and, I have a lot of friends that are either Korean or they're Chinese or
Mm.
I think it's the food that you grow up with. And, there's people that for them, it's a bowl of ramen. That's
Hmm.
my comfort food. For people in my family, it could be a bowl of chicken noodle soup because that's what they grew up with. That's what they've been fed when they were sick.
Mm.
So I think a lot of that comes from childhood memories.
Right.
For sure. And I think there was sort of a trend again toward comfort foods during the pandemic when it's like an uncertain time. People were, everything you read in the news was alarming, and, everything you were talking about was so scary. And so you want to stay in your home and have those comforting types of dishes that make you feel good.
I think that's exactly it, is the feel good dishes. It's the world is a crazy place right now, and the one thing that is certain for a lot of us, but not for all of us, is a good home cooked meal. And
Mm.
the memories and the nostalgia and the comfort and the feel good all relate to a good meal that brings those memories.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like even just the slow down in the way that we prepare things, like no one needed to open a can of soup to quickly put together a casserole because they had things to do or places to be. So things slowed down and you started doing things from scratch that sort of, I don't know if it was like meditative or that repetitive, like slow moving sort of process that helped calm you almost in a way and also tasted great. And you
Well, yeah,
realize like the benefit of making it yourself. And now we're seeing that kind of continue over.
yeah, like look at the bread. Everybody started making sourdough and bread
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
pandemic because I think you touched on it exactly. Like we needed to get our mind off of things. We couldn't go outside. We were stuck watching the internet and TV, and so
Yeah.
what do? Well,
Hmm.
Yeah.
we bake, we cook. And there were some interesting food trends that came out during the pandemic as well. Like I remember my kids making Dalgona coffee, the
Oh,
whipped coffee craze. And
yep.
it was actually
Yeah.
pretty good.
It was surprisingly good.
Yeah, yeah,
Too much work to make a regular thing, though,
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought.
Whenever I hear the blender going upstairs, I'm like, oh, must be coffee time,
Coffee
right?
time.
No, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, we can't look into the future, but it's interesting to think about how that time is going to create those nostalgic memories for us in the future.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. Definitely. It was, from comfort food cravings to even focus on immunity, like their focus on
Mm.
during the pandemic and how people were trying to kind of eat maybe better as well, just to make sure that they stayed healthy.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a lot of shelf stable recipes as well, like what's in my pantry? What can I make? Because I'm not going to the store or I
Yeah.
can't go to the store. or I'm going to order groceries, but there's a 3-day wait, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what's my
Yeah.
kitchen that I can make?
Yeah, good point. And I think also not just because you're at home and you had time to learn things like preserving, so you learned canning or dehydrating or that kind of thing, but also that like you've said, the need now. I feel this need to like make the food last and keep my pantry stocked. And I think some of that has continued on too, where people, it's like this whole homesteader type trend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although, in the last, I'd say probably year, I think that everything now is back to normal. You know, events are being sold out.
Mm-hmm.
People want to go out. Restaurants, there's wait lists. If you don't book or make a reservation within a week, with some of them, you can't get into them. So it's like we are back to the normal before the pandemic. And I don't know how much cooking people are doing now that they're going out again.
Well, hopefully still enough.
Yeah, oh, I agree.
Hopefully, if they're listening to us right now, they are at least interested in cooking.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. If you like this podcast so much you're thinking of launching your own show, pick up the latest issue of Women Who Podcast magazine and learn all about podcasting. Women Who Podcast magazine celebrates women independent podcasters from all over the globe.
It's a place where their efforts are seen, their stories are heard, and their hard work is acknowledged. Women Who Podcast magazine strives to be a forum for fans and hosts to reach out to one another for support, collaboration, and inspiration. Visit womenwhopodcastmag.com and on Instagram at Women Who Podcast Magazine.
I think like you said, the TikTok and the blogs, those types of online food creators, and sometimes it's not necessarily recipe developers, it's food photography or video. There's a lot of videos created about food, and you see it, and that's enough to make you want to either go and seek it out somewhere or make it yourself.
And that's a really big thing happening right now. I don't want to say it's a trend because I don't think it's going to go away.
Mm.
But, you know, sometimes I'll be flipping through TikTok looking for the latest food trends and I go down a rabbit hole and I end up looking at the trends for the entire year. And that's not what I want. I want to know what's happening right now. And then I go down another hole where I see these guys talking about food hacks. And then I end up, you know, like you get your attention span on TikTok, it's crazy because then I've just spent 6 minutes watching somebody make a recipe
Mm.
and it's so like some of these content creators and recipe creators, they're so good
Mm.
and they're so, you know, like I'm just like captivated by it and I want to see what else they're doing. But then there's also the standouts that have been around for a long time, like the Jamie Olivers of the world. And, you know, like I love watching his stuff. I could watch him for hours. Problem is I don't have hours, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
but there's so
Yeah.
much out there on TikTok and YouTube, and that's where the kids of our generation too are going and getting
Mhm.
stuff and getting information and finding new things, not necessarily food related, but that's where they're learning their stuff too, which is interesting.
How much of a demand is there then for chefs since they've sort of been the ones to put these trends out? There must be a fairly big demand for them to also live in this digital space, not just their brick and mortar restaurant space or their cookbooks, but to also expand in and try to influence everything that way too.
I think chefs do the best that they can. They're sometimes working 10 to 14-hour days in
Yeah.
their restaurants, and so making time to do a TikTok video is not a priority for them.
Yeah.
You know, you do see some chefs on like for me, I'm mostly Instagram because it's visual still, but you still see a lot of chefs out there, but they're not making reels, they're not doing recipe videos because when they have days off, that's the last thing they want to be doing.
Yeah.
So so as long as they're showing up and sharing once in a while, I think that's all you can ask of them. And
Hmm.
even then, you know, it's you really shouldn't be asking that of them because their focus is the restaurant, right?
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting to see which, the chefs who do sort of maybe they own the restaurant and now they've gone and they're doing this other side of things, like the ones with the TV shows and
They really need a team, right?
I was going to say they have people that do that, right?
yeah.
Everything is so scripted. All they have to do is show up, bring their personality and cook and then leave, right?
You
Like
mean they're
it's
not actually cooking a meal the way Julia used to do on the TV?
Oh, I'm sure that they are, but everything is prepared. They show up, they cook, and then they're done. And then they move on to the next segment, right? I think that's how quick it is. And it's so well scripted, and their team is so good that they have it all ready to go.
Wow.
And it makes it so fun to watch. But it's also deceiving because then you think you can do it. And then you realize it's actually difficult.
Come on, they just turned around and the cake was baked.
Right? I know. They put it into one oven, and the other oven, they pull it out, and it's ready to go and cut and everything.
Yeah.
I know.
Where are the dishes? Why is my kitchen such a mess?
I know. Yeah.
But it's fun and inspiring for those of
Mhm.
us at home to watch. I think I've always been into food TV.
So much time spent watching food TV.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here, same here. I noticed too, when you think about like the Food Network, the trend seems to be all competitions now,
Oh,
which is kind of
Yes.
sad because bring back Ina. Like, where are all these chefs that used to do the cooking shows? So
Yeah.
I guess the good thing is we still have the cooking channel, and we have Netflix, and we have, subscription TV that does have food shows, or even like Somebody Feed Phil. Oh, that's one of my favorite shows right now. You know, so at least there are alternatives to the constant cooking
Yeah.
competitions.
That's kind of interesting how I feel like I noticed it but didn't actually put words to it because I was frustrated that I couldn't find something that wasn't a cooking competition. So I ended up
Yeah,
just going back and rewatching some Chef's Table
yeah, yeah.
because that's like where it's at for me.
there also seems to be that focus on like fails, the goofy sort of stuff, where they make like, is it cake or is it a handbag? Like these kinds of things, which are sort of, I guess it's pure entertainment. No one's trying to learn how to cook from any of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and some of the competitions are so technical too. It's like, yeah,
Oh,
I could never do that. I
Mm,
could, I could write down the ingredients that you use, but it will never look like what it looks like on the TV.
mhm.
mhm.
Some of the technical things are interesting that sort of trend, but I think it doesn't catch on maybe because it is so specialized, like the foams and the beads and
Oh,
that's really, it's science and food, but it's so complicated. It makes you want to try it, but it doesn't catch on because it's so difficult.
well, and I think that's why these chefs go to culinary school, is to
Oh,
learn these
yeah.
techniques that everybody can't replicate.
If you could do it exactly the same and it were easy and quick, you'd just do it at home and you'd never eat out.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I guess the more people have access to more things too, the chef has to up their game to make it more attractive, to take it
Well,
out, to make
yeah,
you come out.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, one another trend I'm seeing too is people going back to using boxed cake mixes or boxed mixes and making them into recipes. That seems to
Yeah.
be becoming a thing.
Yeah, I came across something about boxed cakes just recently.
And I think the whole, like the trend of finding vintage recipes or the recipes from your grandma's recipe box or,
Hmm.
and then trying to recreate, not even modernize it, but recreate exactly what was made. There seems to be this sort of like love of vintage things at the
Hmm.
moment, which is kind of, it goes back to that nostalgia and comfort, I guess.
Yeah, even cocktails, retro cocktails have made a
Mm,
comeback in the last couple of years, several years. So,
Hmm.
cocktails in general,
Yeah.
yes.
really. Yeah.
Do you have any personal favorite food trends that have come through and survived?
I do like that some of the retro food is coming back. I think that's kind of cool because obviously, it's comforting. I like that there's a focus on foraging food.
Mm,
That's
Mhm.
another trend that's kind of picking up because I think there's so much to be learned from that.
right.
Um, I do love the globalization of cuisines and fusion cuisines. So you could have a Korean taco, or you could have,
Hmm.
authentic Korean food. And so with that globalization trend, we've also seen really interesting spice blends that you
Okay.
can buy at local spice stores, which allow you to be creative as well. So instead of just putting a barbecue seasoning on my grilled chicken, trying to think of one off the top of my head, but I have a lot of Lebanese spices in my pantry, and like za'atar, like I can totally change it up, and I could do 4 different chicken breasts if I wanted. So I really like that there's a lot out there to try and buy based on globalization of cuisines.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Za'atar spice has recently come into our lives, and I'm
Hooked.
very much enjoying it.
Yeah, it's great and it's so simple too.
hmm
Mm-hmm.
I also love fermentation has become big, and that kind of relates to gut health because, like you are what you eat, right? And so the more we learn about fermented food, like foraging foods, I think the better off for us in the long term.
That's an interesting one we talk about amongst ourselves quite often, the fermentation, because I feel like I need to take a class on it. Like, I don't really know how to go about. I mean, yes, you can purchase fermented foods, of course. I have a jar of sauerkraut always in my fridge that I did not make. But I think there's the interest in doing this yourself and trying to like make kimchi or
hmm
make pickles or
I like that it's also cross-cultural, like you say, with the kimchi, like how you can learn about Korean food in general. There's a lot of fermented food in what they cook and make. And so it kind of, yeah, it opens up all those new thought processes.
Yeah, it really does. And you could actually buy the kits. And I
Ah.
did that a few times. And, I could make carrots and again, kimchi or sauerkraut. And so I had all the stuff and it gave you the
Mm.
recipes and they sent along the SCOBY. And I think she's still around. They're still around, but they're not, they don't have as much available as they used to.
Mm.
But that was a great way to learn as well. And then you just have to either buy the supplies to keep it going or figure out again at home how to do it yourself because then you already had the jars and the all the things that you needed to do the fermenting.
Right.
that's such a great entry point into some of these things, being able to buy a kit. We did cheese kits a couple of years ago. We did it for the
hmm
podcast and we all made cheese at home, and you didn't have to start entirely from scratch. You had all the things you needed to make the cheese and very nice instructions, and like it's a great entry
Yeah.
point. And then if you want to take it from there and like add things into your feta or your goat cheese or whatever, you can really just take it wherever you want to take it. I love that there's those kits and
hmm
classes, and it really helps people branch out and try new stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah, and there are other companies in Calgary that do that as well, like sauerkraut and pickles, brine, and they teach the classes and they, help guide you. And so I agree. The more if the more the better you are. 'Cause as much as I'd love to be able to sit down and read a novel and learn about this that way, I don't always have time. I rarely have time to sit down and read unless it's a cookbook. I have time for that.
Okay. Do you have any favorite what's your favorite cookbook? Or do you have a current one that you're working your way through?
Um, that's a really tough question. I have a
Too many to
lot of them.
choose.
Yeah. One that stands out that I will recommend over and over and even buy as gifts is Palestine. So it's a cookbook by Sammy Tamimi and Tara Wigley, and they have worked with Ottolenghi.
Ooh.
Okay.
So it's a Palestine cookbook. It's got some Lebanese in there. It's got a combination of recipes that kind of cross over a little bit like some food does. But I have just found so many great recipes in that cookbook that I will gift it whenever I can.
Awesome. I haven't heard of that one, so that's fun.
That sounds really interesting. I'm gonna go check that out.
Yeah, that does sound
Yeah,
interesting.
it's definitely a good one. And the library is a great resource. And I'm part of an Instagram cooking group that is
Mm.
run by a woman in the US. And for the year, she'll pick out 12 cookbooks. And all you have to do is just join along, right? Like each month, if you can locate the cookbook or buy it or get it through the library, pick a recipe. There's cooking challenges that she posts a couple times a month. But it's a great way to get introduced to new chefs,
Mm.
new recipes, and new techniques. And I love doing that too.
I'm glad it's worked for you, Wanda, because I think I'm part of that same group.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
And I can never find the books. It's like everybody knows before me to go to the library and take the books out, and then I'm like, I can never get the books. And
Yes.
I think I've joined in like 2 months in
Mhm.
like, I don't know, a year and a half or something that I've been
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I can't get the book. And it was so fun when I was able to do it. I think it's a great way, like this thing she's got going on, to promote cookbooks and cookbook authors. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I absolutely have the same challenge, and sometimes the books just have not made it to the Calgary Library yet.
Yes.
I found that with some of these cookbooks, and again, I don't do it all the time because even less and less more now because I don't have a lot of time, but I will actually buy the cookbook
Mm.
when I've found like a half dozen or a couple of recipes that I like and I haven't had enough time to do more. It actually, I end up buying the cookbook.
Which is ideal if you can do
Hmm.
that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Support the author and hopefully a little local bookstore at the same time.
Hmm.
Yes.
I'm trying to get books out of my house, so I'm not buying cookbooks.
Yeah.
It would defeat all my arguments to my husband to get rid of all his books.
Oh,
I
yes.
brought books in. I'm
Right.
an online recipe girl. I like Pinterest. I like all the blogs. I will Google anybody's
Mm.
name if I know that they cook stuff that I like. The only thing I'm not really a fan of is when the recipe's only in a video and you have to follow along.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. As a food blogger, I've been a food blogger since let's see, 2006. And to see in the last 5, 7, 10 years this shift to having to create a video
Mm.
has been so much work for food bloggers because not only are you already the writer, the editor, the photographer, the food stylist,
Yeah.
shopping for the ingredients, now you have to add video editing and video into
Mm.
it. And so, like myself, I don't have time for it. So while I think it's great that some people have really adopted it and you see a lot of food videos out there, I agree with what you say in that I'm the same way. I'd have to keep pausing it to what do they say? How much do I need of that? Um, so I just stay back to the old standard way of writing out a recipe.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like it that way.
That video too is really appealing to a generation that just doesn't want to read a recipe.
And a lot of people are visual learners, whether it's through a video or a series of photos of each step, and those are things you don't get in cookbooks. Some
Yeah.
cookbooks, you don't even have a photo for every recipe, although I prefer when there's photos personally,
Yes.
but
I was going to say, even
um,
just having a photo for a recipe will make me more likely to try it.
mhm.
Yes.
Like, it's taken me years to start cooking out of books that don't have pictures, like, especially older cookbooks.
Because you trust your skills more
Yeah.
now to know if it's
Yeah, like
right.
I know what I'm
Yeah,
supposed to get at the
exactly.
end. I can
Yeah.
look at the picture and be like, well, mine's not pretty, but at least I've got the components there. Whereas sometimes it's overwhelming or daunting to think like, oh, I don't know
I
what
don't
this is going to
even,
look like at the end.
yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Like I'm the same way. I want to see a picture so I know what the end result's supposed to look like.
Hmm.
But I just had a thought. We go to a restaurant and we order a meal and we don't know what that meal looks like.
No, that's very
Oh.
true.
Interesting thought, right?
Yeah, that is interesting. I think that's part of the enjoyment of going out to eat. A
Hmm.
little bit is that you're surprised and kind of
Yeah. All of your senses
impressed,
are
and yeah,
are surprised by what shows up. That is
Right?
really
yeah,
fun.
yeah, it is
Yeah.
fun.
Huh.
Is there anything else about trends, Wanda, that you have thought of or want to comment on, or?
Hmm. Trying to think more about the trends that are happening right now that we've seen. Like
Right.
one of the biggest ones, as far as I'm concerned, is
Yeah.
technology. So food technology, like AI, how that's playing a part, and also even vertical greenhouses. Like we're living in a time where AI is very interesting and scary at the same time. And then the how food technology is advancing.
Hmm.
For sure. It seems like there's a trend toward countertop appliances with multiple functions. Maybe instead of heating up a full oven, we have something on our countertop that uses electricity and, less energy. It's
Hmm.
quick and easy.
Yeah, we seem to be really aware of our energy use when it comes to food and cooking.
Hmm.
Yes, which is important.
Hmm.
But even things like plant-based alternatives as far as lab-grown meat, you
Mm.
Hmm.
know, technology there.
Yeah.
Vertical farming. I know Calgary's got a couple of vertical farming businesses, companies now. And, that's allowing for indoor agriculture and controlling produce and ensuring it's fresh all year round,
Hmm.
as well as greenhouses being grown in Alberta, again, for the same reason, to be able to have local Alberta grown tomatoes in December. Like, that's
Yeah.
pretty fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
Automation and robotics in food production is another one. We haven't seen so much of it here, but it's coming, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Well, and robots serve the food at the restaurant sometimes too. I've been to a couple of
Hmm.
dim sum restaurants in the last little while where robots served our food to our table. So,
And that's really cool. But even think about some of the Japanese restaurants where there's a conveyor belt and you just kind of grab whatever sushi you want. So that's all part of food technology and the advancements as well.
yeah, and it's like
Right.
low tech version, right? The little series of boats that floats by you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's really fascinating. And I mean, some of the things seem ridiculous when you see them, like the butter boards and, things that pop up that seem everybody kind of jumps on, funny little things that pop up. Okay, why am I seeing this everywhere? And then it disappears.
Hmm.
And then the things that last, I think, are the important things. Like you said, the technology, energy saving, and the time saving, those the awareness around what we're eating,
Yeah.
what we're consuming, where it comes from. I think that's all. I guess maybe it's not so much a trend to say that people want to know where their food is coming from. I think that's, if it is a trend, I hope it stays because that's
Hmm.
important.
Well, and ethical eating and food waste and sustainability is a big conversation that's happening right now as well.
Hmm.
So the more that people know that the beef they're eating, it came from a sustainable cattle ranch and the animals were treated well, I
Hmm.
think that's gonna make them feel better about it. Those that are still choosing to eat meat.
Hmm.
So all of that comes into play too. There's so many factors, in the world of ethical eating right now.
Hmm.
Um,
And I think we're going to see more sort of like the Depression era trends where we were cooking on rations because the cost of food is going up so much. We're trying to stretch that dollar and get the most out of what you've got.
that and food waste, like food waste
Hmm.
in Canada is at 58%. And it's a horrible fact. And I think everyone is, including chefs and restaurants, are part of that. So how can we do better as a country and a nation and people to cut down our own food waste, especially like you say, groceries are at an all-time high right now, so expensive that more people are using the food banks because they can't afford to feed their kids. Brown bagging for Calgary's kids lunches, they're making way more lunches now because of the same reason. So it all comes into play that we need to, like you say, maybe buy less. Maybe instead of doing one big shop every week, we do little shops throughout the week so that there isn't so much food waste.
Hmm.
Buy what's on sale. Look at the ugly produce. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't have to look perfect. There's different ways to be able to save some money and have less food waste as well.
Hmm.
Hmm. And hopefully that's a trend that sticks around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we let you go, can you tell everybody? I would like to know what your food blog is and also where they can find and follow and get their hands on Savour Calgary magazine.
Yes. So Savour Calgary Food Magazine, we publish 6 times a year, and we are available on our website. There is a tab that says About Us and then Find Us, and it lists all the locations throughout the city that you can find us, in the different communities or the farmers markets, restaurants, cafes, that sort of thing. And you can also read the entire issue online and back issues if you can't find a print copy of the magazine. Everything that goes into our magazine, our print version, can be found online. As far as my own personal blog, it is bakersbeans.ca, all one word, bakersbeans.ca. And it's not as happening right now as I'd like it to be because I have so many other things happening, but I still do try to post recipes once in a while.
Well, with so many years under your belt of blogging, I bet there's a lot to go through and to go back and look at. So I'm very interested. As I said, I
Hmm.
often find recipes online, so I'm all for finding a new blog. So that's awesome. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been an interesting chat and just something that we keep talking about and we thought our listeners would also enjoy hearing about. So we really appreciate you making the time to come and chat with us about it.
Well, and thanks for having us on the show. And we're always happy to come back and talk about different food topics and answer any questions any of your listeners might have.
Ooh,
Oh, fantastic.
awesome.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Wanda.
Have a good day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
And now for the fine print. For links to recipes and many other random things we talked about in this episode, check out the show notes or our website, www.threekitchenspodcast.com. Join us over on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, YouTube, and TikTok to see what we're cooking up next. And if you love the show, tell a friend. Word of mouth is the #1 way people learn about new podcasts. Thank you so much for listening.
And it's not a trend anymore. That's
No.
that's just good food, right?
That's exactly right.